Welcome to session 2 of the 50 Days of Faith small group study. My name is Justin Hayes. I'm the pastor of Dodge City Church of the Nazarene, and I'm thrilled to walk alongside you as we all learn to live more by faith and less by sight. You know, we really live in an impatient society, and that attitude seems to define us as this: we want what we want, and we want it now. And that shows up all over the place. For instance, over 50% of adults in America are in serious financial strains because of debt. They want their stuff now and they can't wait for it. Gym membership enrollment spikes during the month of January because everyone wants to lose a few pounds during the month of January, but by February, most new memberships have never actually been used. We want to be healthy, but we don't want to work for it. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of married couples in America divorce, and the percentage increases with subsequent marriages. In other words, second, third marriages, the rate of divorce is even higher. People want to find happiness in marriage, but are unwilling to grow in intimacy together. And then now social media has created a platform for people to share their opinions without having earned the right to be heard through good reputation. People want to be heard without earning the right to be heard. And all of these are examples of rampant impatience in our culture. But listen, impatience is not an American cultural issue alone. It's a human issue. By nature, we are impatient. We want what we want, and we want it now. And that even shows up in our spiritual lives. We want to experience the blessedness of spiritual maturity, but don't want to live out the disciplines that help us grow. We want the Lord's blessing without having to sacrifice anything. And then commonly, we want the Lord to endorse any idea we have about managing our lives without consulting Him. We say, God, I'm going to do this, be with me. And then when trouble appears, and it almost always seems to appear, we want the Lord to bail us out as quickly as possible, even though we probably got into this trouble in the first place because we didn't wait on Him. And that reality appears in the life of Abraham. So right now, press pause and read in your group Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 20. Abraham and his family settled in Canaan, the promised land, and before long, a famine strikes. And Abraham and his family experience a food shortage and then attempt to deal with the situation by migrating to Egypt. Now, Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, believe it or not. In fact, Egypt was perhaps the first location for large-scale agriculture in human history because of the predictable nature of the Nile River. Each year, the Nile River flooded pretty much on cue during the months of August and September. And then when the floodwaters receded, the soil was well watered and covered with a thick layer of silt from the river, which made it particularly fertile. So Egyptian farmers could plant seed and expect a rich harvest with very little work in the meantime. And so Abraham and his family moved to Egypt to escape the famine because it was the one place in their vicinity that would have abundant food. But things became complicated for Abraham's clan as they were traveling to Egypt. Abraham became aware of the possibility that the Egyptians would kill him and steal his wife Sarah because she was so beautiful. And so out of fear, he instructed Sarah to say that she is his sister when they got there. And that really isn't a lie, believe it or not. We find out in Genesis chapter 20 that Abraham and Sarah had the same father, but different sisters, or different mothers rather. And before we get too judgmental or grossed out about the possibility of Abraham and Sarah being brother and sister, just remember that this was a different time in a very different culture. Well, Abraham and his clan arrive in Egypt, and as expected, the Egyptians see Sarah's beauty. They approach her, and she says she was Abraham's sister rather than his wife. The Egyptians take her then to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he makes Sarah one of his wives and places her in his harem. Now, out of thanks, Pharaoh showers Abraham with wealth in the form of slaves and livestock. But we can easily assume that he would have rather had his wife back in his arms rather than Pharaoh's. Things then turn precarious for Pharaoh's household. The king and his household are afflicted with a serious disease. We don't know what the disease was, but we know that it came from the Lord. And we also know that somehow Pharaoh learned the truth about Sarah through this plague, right? And he finds out that he had taken another man's wife rather than the unmarried sister of a wealthy immigrant. Pharaoh called Abraham out and then expelled him, his family, and his possessions from Egypt. Well, what happened in this story? Well, in short, Abraham grew impatient and tried to deal with his problems himself rather than wait on the Lord's solution. And listen, Abraham had a real problem, okay? Famine is no joke. When there is no food available, the temptation to do anything and everything to survive kicks in with urgency. And on paper, the decision to pack up everyone and move to Egypt makes a lot of sense. Listen, you're living in a land without food, and over there is a land with lots of food. You're living in a country that cannot sustain life, and over there is the breadbasket of the ancient world. On paper, the decision to move to Egypt made a lot of sense. But I want you to notice something in the text. Abraham never consulted the Lord on the matter. He simply made a decision and went. He left the promised land, and the Lord had called Abraham to live in Canaan and not in Egypt. The Lord promised to bless Abraham if he lived in the land to which he had been called. But Abraham panicked when problems grew too large for him to handle and moved out of the land of promise for quick resolution in Egypt. And there his wife was taken from him and given to another man, something that must have been nerve-wracking. And perhaps when Sarah was taken, he wondered if this was really better than famine. But Justin, the Lord helped Abraham in Egypt by inflicting the Egyptians with disease, by restoring Sarah, and by giving Abraham more wealth. Yes, he did. But Abraham would have never been in the mess in the first place if he had remained patient and waited on the Lord's deliverance. Remember, Abraham had the Lord's promise of blessing by living in the promised land. Faith is patient. And that's not easy for us because most of us are impatient. We want what we want, and we want it now. And that's especially true when we face hardship. We want immediate relief from our hardships, immediate resolution of our problems, immediate provision when resources are lean. We want what we want, and we want it now. But patience is waiting on the Lord during times of hardship. It's trusting in the Lord's timing even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. It's resisting the temptation to panic and make urgent decisions to solve problems. Faithful patience doesn't always make sense. Remember, Abraham was living in a land that was starving because of famine and decided to move to a land where there was food. Now, his decision makes sense to us, but it was the wrong decision because he took control of his life away from the Lord. He looked at the problem and believed that he could handle the situation without the Lord's help. But Justin, if I choose to live by patience, how long will I wait? The answer is, who knows? It could be a few hours, could be a few days, could be a few years. It could even be a lifetime. But trusting God in our hardship involves also trusting in his timing. And so rather than saying we want what we want when we want it, we say we want what you want when you want it. And remember, our world is corrupt, right? You don't have to spend a lot of time looking around to see that. Our world is corrupt, and the only solution for our world is the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's been almost 2,000 years since Jesus ascended to the Father. But the church has been waiting ever since. And still we wait patiently and faithfully on the Lord. So avoid the temptation to wrestle control of your life away from him and try to solve your problems yourself. Trust in the Lord and in his timing. Wait on him during times of hardship. He always has the right solution in mind if we are willing to faithfully be patient. So now take some time and answer the discussion questions in your group, and may the Lord richly bless you as you follow him faithfully. God bless, and see you next time.